Welcome to today's video. Please kind of bear with me. My background as an instructor, as a coach, is in tennis, and generally I have 90 minutes to 3 hours or so to work with a client on relaying information. So I may get a little bit wordy, but I'll try and cut it out and compress it in more of a digestible length. I did bring a disc that I'm used as a visual aid for trying to communicate a very effective and a science-based way of creating snap in your swing during release. There are a number of things that lead up to creating more snap, and I'm going to try and relay this to you from release backwards. And for the most part, in order to not get bogged down in too much information, I'm primarily going to focus on the action of the arm in terms of creating momentum, and the action of potentially the elbow, the wrist especially in a passive sense, but mostly I'm going to focus on release and the path with which your arm wants to travel in order to create the most snap. So let's get into the different facets of the grip. So release, I'm not going to get into pressure necessarily, how tight you should be holding the disc, where you should hold the disc. All of these are incredibly important for creating spin, which ultimately is snap. But I do want to outline a few of the key points of the grip, of the release of the disc, that are going to be conducive in creating more snap. What you want to do is have the disc spin off of your hand in a tighter axis. Let's say, for instance, that you're holding a fan grip. If you're holding a fan grip, right, and the disc spins off of all four fingers, the four fingers below the disc, if it spins off of all four fingers, this is the largest axis that it could spin off of. What you want to do is create a tighter axis. How this makes sense in sport that most people have seen is figure skating, which sounds kind of interesting to relate to disc golf, but when a figure skater goes up to spin in the air, they go from a wider axis to a tighter axis. What they're doing is they're increasing their access to spin or rotation. So they tighten up so that they can spin in the air or on the ice in a much quicker fashion. How this relates to disc golf, and you can see this across the board in anyone that throws with a lot of spin and speed, is the disc at release is spinning off the index finger. Anthony Bedanza, if you've watched his channel, he actually gives me a shout out in that channel, and I helped him one day. We were in Vegas. I want to say this was last year, so Vegas 22, and he was very much interested in getting a bit more snap, getting a bit more distance, and now granted, he was very much in his infancy, and he still is, in terms of developing his game, but he was already I would say north of 360, 370. And we were able to add almost immediately, with a high level of regularity, quite a bit of distance to his drive just by focusing on the point of release. What I told him is, you want to try and have the disc come off as small of an axis as possible. Meaning, rather than the disc, let's say for instance, even we'll go away from the fan grip. If you have a power grip and it comes off all 4 fingers, that's a very wide axis for it to rotate off of. How you could create a smaller axis is at release, you want it to just come off of your index finger. And again, it goes from being 4 fingers, so a wider axis, to a much smaller axis. So it goes from wide to narrow in terms of the axis. You can see this with a number of pros in their warm-up routine. So you'd see, let's say, Chris Dickerson, in his pre-shot routine, you'll actually see him spinning the disc in his hand here. He's just allowing the disc to rotate around that index finger. Matty O, who I've played with quite a bit, I'm actually originally from Alabama and traveled with a phenomenally talented player, Cameron Colglazer, who's from Alabama. And Matty O, Barsby, Cameron, and I actually lived together at the same time in Mobile, Alabama. I got to play quite a bit with Matty O. You'll see him, he's a very spinny player, which spin equates to snap, essentially. He throws, for the most part, always with a fan grip, a modified pinch grip, whatever you want to call it. But you'll see him with his high take back, really in his pre-shot routine, going through and spinning the disc on his index finger, just getting that feel of what he's trying to replicate at release. There are a number of other very spin-oriented players that are super duper clean. Bradley Williams comes to mind. But in his pre-shot routine, he's actually pretty tight at release. So he's hanging onto the disc. He'll really rotate back, hang onto the disc, but he's very, very clean. Therefore, at release, it is coming off of his index finger, potentially his index and his middle finger. The player that I've seen personally from the Houston area, who no longer really competes, I hope he's still throwing because he was a phenomenal talent. The player that I would say arguably has the most snap in history, and this might be an argument, but I would say it's a pretty silly argument, but he probably throws the furthest golf shots, golf lines, of anybody that's ever walked on planet Earth, and his name is Robbie Bratton. I heard Garrett say he wishes, Garrett Gerthy, who throws pretty big, he wishes he could do the things that Robbie can do with a disc, and this is coming from Garrett, who can pretty routinely throw 600 plus. I have seen on flat ground with, I think it's probably a 9-speed, he was throwing Predators on very steep hyzer and getting them to flip up. I have seen Robbie on flat ground throw in the 700-foot range with what is a fairway driver. The dude had an extraordinary amount of snap, and he actually used 2 fingers. Oddly enough, Robbie would actually go from a fan grip to a 2-finger grip So that disc was potentially coming off both fingers with the amount of audible snap that he was creating. Another player in the more modern era that actually uses two fingers is Aaron Gossage. If you play alongside Gossage, there's a pretty considerable audible snap. That's not necessarily what you're looking for. Snap, the sound of the disc releasing, is actually resistance. So it could be debatable that if there was less resistance, that you could get more distance, more speed, more spin. But again, those two guys who throw with an extraordinary amount of spin and speed use just two fingers. I don't think that the optimal form or technique has been found yet in disc golf. I think that we've made massive strides in figuring out how to throw the disc far, how to throw the disc repeatably, but I do believe that there's still quite a bit more to be found in terms of distance and speed before we reach a ceiling of kind of human potential and how we're laid out. I'm digressing quite a bit, so I'll try and keep this a little bit less wordy. I put on this disc a very crude illustration. Had a nice little arts and crafts day. Got quite carried away. You can kind of disregard most of this, but I want to talk about the clock, the face of the clock. So in my very crude representation of a clock, and for you TikTokers, internet kids that have only ever seen digital timepieces, this is kind of what a clock looks like. There's 12 o'clock up top, 6 o'clock down low, 3 and 9. Also, internet, I tried crossing out the numbers on this disc. It is an 11-time rock. It's pretty old. Numbers probably don't work anymore, but have at it. So why this clock is important and relevant to creating snap is you want to actually create angular momentum in order to snap the disc. We are trying to get it to rotate off of a tighter axis. So again, going off the index finger, which will allow you access CC to spin, right? But you have to create angular momentum in order to do so. What I mean by that is for a right-handed player, you want to move the disc at release from inside to outside. You can start outside. Let's say, for instance, that I'm trying to throw across the canal here, and I want to put the disc on a steep amount of hyzer and have it flip up. I would go from outside, so again, outside, so away from my body, and I'm kind of exaggerating here, but I'd go from outside to inside, and then I would create angular momentum change, which is snap. I think a far more accurate description of snap is torque. So I have momentum coming towards me, and then I want to change that momentum. If you've ever done any amount of racing in a vehicle, even go-karting, you will understand angular momentum and feel it in a car. Let's say, for instance, that you're at a high rate of speed and you're trying to go on the racing line. You'll go outside. So again, you'll go from the outside of the line, carry quite a bit as much speed as you can without the tires breaking loose, and you're trying to hit the apex. And then once you hit that apex, you're going to carry that momentum. That turn is going to change. You're going to carry that momentum and you'll feel it in the vehicle as you're driving. This is how you can optimally and repeatably create snap. You're going to go from outside to inside, back, outside. That sounds very, very strange potentially to some of you, but let's say, for instance, that I'm just trying to create spin by going straight up and down. So if I go straight up and down like this, and again, I'll just use a fan grip because it's easier. I'm going to go straight up and down like this and try and just create spin. So I can do it a little bit, catching a completely different thing. I can do it a little bit, especially if I use my fingers. But again, using a small muscle group that's a non-repeatable muscle group is a recipe for disaster. So if you're trying to right now in your disc golf game on a high speed shot, a drive, create snap by moving your hand and wrist, actively moving your hand and wrist, it's a very suboptimal way to create spin. What you want to do is allow your hand and wrist to be passive, so passive, and allow that whip to be created by your hand and wrist. But again, you're going to create more snap by changing the angle of the momentum. So you're going to create more angular momentum by going from, for a right-handed player, let's say I'm going to go from left to right. So I'm just going to go from left to right. I can create quite a bit more spin naturally here by going from left to right than I can from going from A to B straight forward. I see a ton of beginning players that are really, really trying to throw the disc hard, and they go straight back, straight forward. It's really, really hard to create any angular momentum if you go straight back, straight forward. You're not going to create any spin. You're also going to rob yourself of speed, because what you're doing when you throw a disc quickly, you're going from outside inside towards the power pocket, back outside, because you're trying to carry that momentum through the shot. And the acceleration, the true acceleration, comes from that directional change. So for a right-handed player, you go from left to right, back, out to the right. So it's that change of direction once you've reached the center, your power pocket, if you will, and then you explosively move back out. And this is one of the easiest ways to create snap, and it's accessible with just the arm motion, but that's not really a power producer. What you're doing with your arm needs to be quite passive except for the path with which your arm moves. But again, how you're able to do this and why I wrote the terrible clock here is you want to actually move the disc in your hand, feel the momentum in your hand where the disc is moving from left to right out of your hand. So again, it's moving from, let's call this 9 o'clock to 12 o'clock. You would think that snapping the disc like you do a towel, if you go from bottom to top, you would think you could get even more snap, but that's actually counterintuitive because you're wanting to go from more the left side of the disc. If my hand is here up top at 12, I'm wanting to go from the left side of the disc. So again, I'm wanting to go from left to right, not with my hand, but with my momentum to create snap. I hope this has helped. I really would like to be more concise with my words, because if you get super duper overloaded with information, it tends to be hard to translate it to sport. I have worked with a number of kiddos who have aspirations to play high-level tennis. Some that are aspiring to play college ball, others that are aspiring to play at the professional levels. And one thing I have noticed over many years of coaching tennis at a very high level is when you get into a training session, you want to focus on a narrow scope of things. You don't want to go out there and try and accomplish like 4 or 5 things on your forehand or backhand or serve, whatever you're trying to do. You really want to narrow it down to a pretty small range of things that you're trying to accomplish for that day. Get a ton of reps. Establish muscle memory. And then after you feel as though you can do X, Y, or Z without thinking about it, once you have the feel for it, you can then start implementing other things. A great drill that you can do, and again, I like things where the barrier to entry is low. It doesn't require a field. All you need is a disc and then some space. If you can do this outside, I recommend it. Things indoors break. I haven't broken anything personally yet, but if you can just get the feel of the disc coming off your index finger, and then again, all you're trying to do is spin the disc with good speed, and you will see that you can get quite a bit more speed by going, by going from left to right. So I can go from left to right and get a lot more spin than I can if I was trying to go straight up and down. If I go straight up and down and I don't use any small muscle group, the disc almost has no spin. That's why you see a lot of players that are at the amateur level or beginning, and their disc comes out like this, straight through, and their disc has all that wobble, that off-axis torque. If they were going from outside to inside to back outside, which sounds kind of crazy, but again, it's accessible if you understand that change of direction is where you get spin and speed. I hope this video has helped. I'm gonna try and put in a bit of actual physical throwing. I'm pretty new to this editing thing. Not real savvy on the technology in general, but I will try to put in a number of videos, try and voice over a bit, potentially voice over quite a bit of this because it's very wordy. But I hope this helps. I would say that the two key things to take from this is the fact that you want to create a smaller axis in just the hand and just the grip. So instead of having the disc come off of 4 fingers, tighten up that axis just like a figure skater does when they tighten up their physical axis with their body. Have the disc come off of your index finger. That's why a ton of people index. So again, if you put it here in your finger, that's indexing the object. Having a little bit of space, if you're throwing a power grip, having a little bit of space here really helps out, because now you have a separate part and you have quite a bit more feel if you have this space in between your middle and index finger. And again, get that disc to spin off your index finger. And then a second key focus is that angular momentum change, which creates torque, which creates snap. So go ahead and go from outside to inside to outside. Obviously without the pauses or breaks. You want to do this fluidly, but feel that momentum going from outside, moving inside, and then moving back outside. Carry that momentum away from your body. It sounds very odd to be able to hit lines away from your body, but I'll get into the more technical elements of hitting lines. It's far more important where the disc is at release in relation to your target and where your chest is at release for hitting lines. It's not about, and this might sound super odd, it's not about following through to your target, extending to your target on a high speed shot. I guarantee you, the disc is gone right here. You're not following through on your target. You're just keeping your chest. You're actually blocking your rotation, which sounds super duper odd, but you're blocking your rotation at release, which keeps the disc on the line. And then everything else that follows afterwards, your follow through, is post-release. The disc is gone, guaranteed. So I hope this helps. I will attach a little bit of throwing potentially. This was quite wordy, but if you have any questions, comment. I'm going to try and release a number of videos. Again, bear with me. I'm not super good at editing anything at all, technology-wise. But I'll try and get quite a bit more videos out and try and answer questions if anybody has any questions in the comments. All right, keep at it with practice and have a good day.